Hey there, hi there, hello there. That's 70s reference. I just wanted to hop on real quick to run through the light reaction and Calvin cycle lecture just in case you missed it or would like to hear it a second or third time. So as you can see, I've already pulled up 8th period's Google Classroom. This was the last period I saw, so I'm just going to run with it. The agenda here was the same for all classes, light reaction and Calvin cycle PowerPoint, just reviewing those processes found within photosynthesis. We had 2 short activities that we reviewed in class, which I will have a short separate video to review those. And then last but not least, there was an overall importance writing piece just before we got into the quiz. And that was just meant to summarize everything that we had already gone through. And the 2 activities that we did in class led us up to that writing piece. Okay. So if you're in our sheltered program, there is a separate PowerPoint that is in Spanish. And then activities at the bottom of the activities page are also in Spanish. Alrighty, so let's just jump into it. Here is the PowerPoint. Just going to go ahead and load that, get it set up. Okay, so the reason we're talking about light reaction and Calvin cycle is because the photosynthesis process that we've already discussed, it actually takes place in these 2 stages, that being the light reaction and the Calvin cycle. Okay. The light reaction and the Calvin cycle both occur within the plant's chloroplast. Now remember, we do not find chloroplast in animal cells. In other words, we are made of animal cells and we do not have chloroplasts. Okay, we're only going to find those in plants. And if we take a look at the chloroplast in more depth, we see that there's a part of it called the thylakoid. Specifically in the thylakoid, it is where the light reaction occurs, and we're going to talk about light reaction first because it has to occur first in order to carry out the following sequence. Anywho, the thylakoid actually looks like a stack of pancakes. Not that anyone would really want to eat a green stack of pancakes, but it's kind of what they look like smushed circles almost, or ovals, excuse me. The first thing that we're going to see happen is light. And obviously this is called the light reaction. It depends on light. The entire reaction depends on light. So what we see is that the thylakoid is absorbing this light energy from the sun. Makes sense. It's also absorbing water. Remember that water is being sucked into the plant through the roots. Okay, so that water is in the soil and the roots are absorbing the water that way. So far we already have energy and water, and that is the reactants for the light reaction, and this is going to end up producing oxygen. It's also producing ATP and NADPH, which ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. Again, the pronunciation's a little weird, but adenosine triphosphate, tri being 3. Okay, in fact, if you take a look at the left image, we see 3 P's. 1, 2, 3. You'll notice that these 3 phosphates are held together by 2 bonds. Those bonds are where energy is stored. Okay, so energy is stored in those phosphate bonds. So when we say that we are creating adenosine triphosphate in the light reaction, we're really just saying we're forming those bonds or reforming those phosphate bonds because we're just storing energy in those bonds. The whole purpose of ATP is to give the cells all the power. So another way to remember ATP, all the power. And you can think of this as having a charged battery ready to provide power. Right? We have a full battery, it is ready to use. Now, NADPH is similar in that it's an electron carrier. In fact, it's going to carry energy in the form of high energy electrons. And electrons, if you've been in chemistry before, electrons are a negatively charged particle. The whole point here is ATP and NADPH are going to transport that energy from the light reaction to the Calvin cycle. So as we move into the Calvin cycle, we're going to see this first occur in the stroma, okay? And they're going to be, in the Calvin cycle, it will receive the energy that is transported using ATP and NADPH. Something else that the Calvin cycle is going to take in or use as a reactant or raw material would be carbon dioxide. Okay, so we've already discussed how light energy and water are used in photosynthesis as a whole. They come in via the light reaction. Carbon dioxide comes in a little later in photosynthesis because it's entering during the Calvin cycle. Then, of course, our last and final end goal, our main product that we're looking for, is glucose, also known as sugar. Remember, anything that ends with an "ose" is going to be sugar, so glucose. Glucose is a carb. In fact, it's the monomer of carbs. In other words, it makes up carbohydrates. And the whole point of the Calvin cycle is to take power from ATP and NADPH. It's going to convert that carbon dioxide into glucose. Now you may see that carbon dioxide, it's just CO2. Where are we getting that hydrogen from in glucose? Well, the light reaction, because the light reaction splits the water molecule in half. It splits the hydrogen and the oxygen from one another. It splits the hydrogen and the oxygen from one another. The oxygen is the byproduct. That's, one of our products, so that's why it's released. The hydrogen is that energy that's being moved into the Calvin cycle. So that is where that hydrogen, or those hydrogens, because see, we have 12, a part of glucose, that's where those hydrogens go. Okay, so it gets combined with carbon dioxide to make the glucose sugar. Now, what happens to ATPH and NADPH when ATP and NADPH, what happens to them when they drop off the energy? Well, they just go back to the light reaction. Okay, so it's a constant cycle for those energy carriers. And what we see is ATP then turns into a DP, because remember those bonds between the phosphates are what's storing the energy. So when it releases or drops off the energy, it's just breaking one of those bonds with the phosphate. Okay, and that's what we see in the bottom left-hand corner. It breaks one of those bonds and then turns into a DP, D meaning di, di means two. So adenosine diphosphate, 2, because here we now have 2 phosphates, which are just held together by one bond. So that means, that there is less energy available. So it's kind of like having a dead battery. What do we do when our phone has, my husband. What happens when our phone is dead? We recharge it. If it's a dead phone, can we use it? No, we're just going to plug it into the charger, let it recharge, and then we're going to be able to use it. Okay, so it's that constant cycle. When I go home, I charge my phone. When I wake up the next morning, I can use it. I can text so-and-so. Then I'm texting so much that my phone dies. Then I go and recharge it. Then I can use it. Constant cycle. That's what we see this ADP and the NADP plus doing, is they're just going or being sent back to the light reaction to pick up more electrons or more energy. Okay, so before we move on to the activities, I want to really quickly recap what this looks like. Photosynthesis consists of the light reaction, which occurs in the thylakoid, and the Calvin cycle, which occurs in the stroma. It's just that space in the chloroplast. We have 2 electron carriers, energy carriers, that are transporting energy from the light reaction. Okay, remember we're getting that energy from the sun. They're transporting that energy from the thylakoid to the stroma, then back to the thylakoid. Okay, so that constant cycle, it's just transporting energy from one place to the next. So that energy can be used to make our end product, which is glucose. That is what plants need in order to perform their daily functions. Okay, is glucose. That's our end result. That's what we're really wanting. Overall, our two products here are oxygen and glucose, but the plants are only going to use glucose. Okay, so we are going to jump into the next video to review the following activities, but what I would like you to do before you watch that is first read the directions here. Our first activity is just a quick drag and drop. It's just to give us a visual of what we've discussed. So please label where the light reaction occurs, the reactants involved in the light reaction, as well as the products. And then move on to the Calvin cycle. Label where the Calvin cycle occurs, and then the reactant and product there as well. After that, please watch the review video, and then we're going to move on to the second section of that video, which will direct you towards the answers for this T-chart. Okay? Once we complete the T-chart, you'll be able to successfully complete the short writing activity that will be attached in the activities portion. All right, so I'm going to jump over and I'll see you then.